Good morning from Colorado. I think there might be a few people here. Hello, I have never done this before. So I guess we're going to find out how it works. Can someone tell me in the chat that you can see me, I'm here, you can hear me? Before I just start babbling. Oh, excellent, thank you. So I've never done a live stream before. I have, however, been to a few of them, mostly author tubers, which is actually kind of fun. I've been thinking that doing like live writing sprints would also be a fun thing for grad students. Anyway, hello. I have like a list of questions here that people asked on Reddit. However, for those of you who are here, please put questions in the chat, and I will answer them, or just anything that you want to talk about. All right, and I also think that you can. I assume that you can see the chat for everyone else. So also, if you want to talk to each other or answer each other's questions, please do as well. All right. I think I've seen streamers do a cool thing before, where you can like make the questions pop up on the screen for everyone to see. But I don't actually know how to do that, so I will just repeat questions for you. Kadir, I know that research experiences are really important for PhD applications. How can I get acceptance to a research group as a summer intern? When should we mail? What kinds of qualifications do professors want to see on an undergrad summer intern, etc.? So this is a good question, and I can answer some of this in the sort of broad sense. And this also might be different in other countries, right? So for example, in the US, there is something called Research Experience for Undergrads, REU sites, where sometimes a particular program will have a group of faculty get together to supervise a set of undergraduate researchers for the summer, and this is funded. And these are usually things that you can apply to. So if you're eligible for that, which you may not be because it looks like you're not in the US, but for others who might be seeing this, that would be the thing that you Google to try to find these is REU, Research Experience for Undergrads, and then you can find these and apply directly to them. And if there aren't like specific programs like that, sometimes faculty are looking for summer researchers, or just, this is also true in general, not just summer, but, throughout the year. I am often looking for undergraduate research assistants. Sometimes I have funding to pay them, and sometimes I don't. So that's a little bit different as well. Like an internship implies that it's paid, and sometimes faculty have money for undergrad researchers, and sometimes you do it for course credit. But in any case, once you've identified a faculty member that you might want to work with, or a research area that you're interested in, some things you might consider are talking, reaching out to someone who is like an undergrad advisor in that department and asking them how it works. But you can also reach out directly to faculty. And my suggestion would be saying something like, hello, I'm an undergrad. I am really interested in research in this area that you are in. I see that you're doing work on X. I find that so interesting. I'm curious if you ever supervise undergraduate research assistants, and if so, what might I be able to do to get involved? I'd be happy to send you a copy of my resume, or let you know the kinds of experience that I have, et cetera. But I think that you can just start a conversation. And if you're thinking about it for the summer in particular, then, honestly, reaching out anytime, even starting now, I think would be fine. But, it's going to be a little bit different for different faculty in terms of whether they even supervise undergrads. For example, I'm much more likely to take an undergrad researcher if one of my PhD students can directly supervise them. But totally reach out, and you can always say something like, let me know if you need more information. I'm happy to send you my resume, etc. So I think that's a good place to start. Let's see. So Cordelia asks, how can I identify a good supervisor with authentic research projects? So I often think that the best place to start in terms of thinking about who you might want to work with as a graduate student is to do research in your area and see who is publishing the kinds of work that you want to do is, one really good place to start. And then you'll know you'll know what research projects they're doing because you'll see what they're publishing. Of course, there's also kind of a lag in the publication process. So you don't want to assume that someone isn't doing a certain kind of work just because they haven't published on it yet, because they might have, for example, just gotten a grant on something, in which case they definitely haven't published anything yet, but that's the kind of work they're going to be doing. So you can sort of approach figuring out, where to apply for PhD programs in two ways. One is you can identify programs first, or you can try to identify advisors first and then see what programs they're in. But both of those things often happens either by doing research on the scholarly work in that field, or programs that are strong in a particular area, which you can often find out by talking to other faculty. So if, for example, you're a current undergrad or a current master's student and you're wanting to apply for PhD programs in the field that you're already in, absolutely talk to faculty in your current department and get their advice. They're going to know better than anyone else. And for example, when I've had students who worked with me as undergrads or as master's students, I gave them very specific advice for exactly where they should apply to PhD programs, and often would introduce them via email to prospective advisors. And this is a super common thing. I often get students handed off to me by other faculty that I know. Maybe that answers your question. Jorge asks, how do I reduce my anxiety about admissions? I wish that I had good advice, better advice on this. For all of you who might be waiting for decisions right now, it can be very, it can make you very anxious, and it's completely normal and completely understandable. It's the same thing if you're going through job hunting. It's actually very similar to job hunting. I guess I would say the general advice for any kind of anxiety that you might have, which is try to find things to keep your mind off of it, make sure that you have a good support system, and don't make it, I obviously can't make you not do this, but you're only going to make your anxiety worse by constantly refreshing Grad Cafe or the grad admissions subreddit and seeing everyone else who's getting interviews and getting offers. That's probably just going to make it worse instead of better. That said, I did that when I was applying to law school. I was constantly refreshing whatever the law school version of this is. I can't remember it. But just recognize that that's probably going to make it worse. And then, I am wary a little bit of framing it this way, but it is also important to remember that if you aren't successful this round, it isn't the end of the world, right? There are a lot of reasons why you might not be accepted into a PhD program that have nothing to do with you. And so sometimes it can be timing, and sometimes you might need to try again next year. And I know that can be hard to hear because it feels like you're, putting your life on hold, et cetera. But as I'm sure some of you have heard me say before, I was rejected from every PhD program that I applied to the first time around. And I ended up applying to law school the next year, and everything sort of turned out okay in the end. Long journey, which is why, like, you know, I'm in my late 30s now, not tenured yet. But I got a job in my field and worked for a year in between, and everything kind of worked out okay. Let's see. I have so someone says, I have a PhD interview next week that is 15 minutes with a small group of faculty, and I'm a little worried because I don't know what we will discuss in 15 minutes. But that's a great question. Especially, so first of all, I'll say I don't actually have any experience with formal PhD interviews, like the thing where it's an interview. There's sort of like less formal versions of that that I've been involved with, like admissions visits where you haven't been admitted yet, or conversations over remotely with prospective advisors. But it doesn't tend to be framed as an interview. So I'm not completely sure what these tend to be like in fields that do formal interviews. I have seen a few YouTube videos from PhD students who talk about their formal interview process, so maybe look those up. But in general, particularly if it's a group of faculty, they're probably gonna, and it's that small, they're probably gonna ask you specific questions. And if I had to guess, the questions are probably going to be things like, why did you apply for this particular program? What kind of research do you see yourself doing? What kind of research have you done? If they know things about the research you've done, they might ask you specific questions about it. So I would have some answers prepared for the things that are probably going to be obvious questions, like, tell me about the research you've done. What do you want to do next? Why did you apply for this program? But I'm not completely sure, what a 15-minute interview would look like. How likely is a small program to take a prospective PhD student after interviewing them? I really can't say at all, unfortunately. People have asked me before, like, what acceptance rates tend to be, et cetera. And even in my program, acceptance rates vary from year to year, and it's really more about the specific batch of students who applied, and also the capacity of the faculty in the program in that particular year. And honestly, you just never know. The thing that I will say is that for most programs, if there is an interview or an admissions visit before acceptance, it's a short list, right? But I can't say how short. How do you decide when you have multiple PhD accepts? Well, first of all, if you're in that position, congratulations. That's actually, so hopefully later today, assuming I still have the energy capacity after I do this stream, the next video that I'm going to film is about this. Like, what are the things that you should take into account in making a decision about a PhD program beyond just advisor? So the video that I posted this past week was about choosing between advisors. So that obviously is one important thing, but it's not the only thing. And there are lots of different things that you can take into account. Once you have multiple offers, it means you can consider things like location when you might not have before, right? All of the things that are going to affect your quality of life that aren't just the research that you're doing. Where is it? Do you have family in the area? Do you like the weather? What's the cost of living? What's the cost of living relative to the stipend in the program? What are the other students in the program like? Because, by this point, you probably have been connected to current PhD students in some way, whether it was an admissions visit or via email or whatever. Are these people that you can see yourself being friends with? Does it seem like a nice community? Does it seem like you'll be supported? A question I commonly get is how much should you take into account the prestige of the university, the program, etc. I'm sometimes a little wary of answering this question because I don't know if I'm biased because, I'm not at an Ivy League university myself, for example. So my take on this is that the prestige of the individual department, program, and even advisors perhaps is more important than the prestige of the university for a PhD, because the work that you do in your PhD is so important compared to, if you all were applying to law school, I would give you the advice to go to the best law school that you get into, because to be frank, law firms and judges who are hiring clerkships, etc., are incredibly elitist, and it means more to be. I'm a little wary of saying this, but my from talking to people in this world, it seems to me like it's better to be the bottom of your class at Yale than the top of your class at a state, a low-ranked state school. That is not true in a PhD program, though. So it might be different in different fields as well. There's research that shows that, for example, people who get PhDs from sort of higher ranked universities have an easier time getting jobs, but I don't know that that is because of the name of the university or if it has to do with resources and the professors who happen to be in these programs, et cetera. But I would say there's a lot of things to take into account here, and you should think about all of them, including, again, things that have to do with your quality of life, et cetera. All right. So Bobby, in their early 40s, and asked how age plays a role in admissions decisions. I would like to say 0. I can tell you it plays 0 role for me. And I can also tell you that in our department, we have multiple PhD students who started when they were in their late 30s or over 40, including a student who graduated recently and got a great academic job as an older graduate. However, I have heard from people that there can be some ageism. I don't entirely know how it plays out, but I can at least tell you that it's not a totally widespread rampant thing, because at least in my field, I know lots of PhD students who are over 40. And so, obviously hard to say from department to a department, but I would definitely not let it discourage you. Considering the university and the department versus the advisor, how do you choose? Hard to say, honestly. I mean, all the things that I just said, considering quality of life and community, if all of those things are bad, let's say that everything about the program just seems awful to you except the best advisor possible for you, and then you have this other program that seems amazing and all of those things are awesome except the advisor maybe not as good. I don't know how you should make that decision. It's going to be really dependent on the kinds of things that are important to you and what makes the advisor better, etc. I can tell you, so I'm, at an R1, but a state school, and students have come into have taken offers at our PhD program who had offers at, arguably better ranked places. And they decided to come here because of, I can't really totally say, but my guess is that part of it is advisor fit and part of it is, I think we have a particularly good culture, et cetera. And so, the prestige of the university or the program not the only consideration, but I obviously can't tell you what that's going to look like specifically for you. So moving past admissions for a minute here, what is the best way to choose a PhD topic and research point? Or actually, so I'm actually not sure if this is a question about like topics when you're deciding, when you're applying, or once you have a PhD deciding on a dissertation topic. But in both cases, I would say, like, what excites you? What do you want to, you're deciding on something, at least in the broad area, something you're going to do for possibly the rest of your career. And you're not going to be stuck on that specific thing, right? Except for like the sort of general field. So, for example, you know, my dissertation was about copyright and online communities. And I do very little work now that is related to law. Most of my work is around ethics and also online communities generally. You know, as people's careers progress, like you can go massively beyond what you started out doing. Like my PhD advisor, you know, she was a learning sciences person. She did education and learning sciences, and by the time I worked with her, she wasn't doing that at all. So you know, it can change. But obviously, you're not going to like get a PhD in sociology and then later do chemistry. Probably not. But then in terms of like narrowing it down from that, like what, you know, what are you excited about? What do you want to learn more about? What do you want to contribute knowledge to the world? And yeah, and it's hard to give more. It's hard to give more specific advice than that. So Kieran asks, how much can a professor influence the decision? So I assume you mean like an admissions decision. My understanding is that this varies a lot by the structure of the department. And so, for example, if you're applying for PhD programs in humanities, then actually individual faculty probably have very little to do with specific decisions, because like that advisor relationship is not as closely paired, in part because of funding structures. And my guess is that also in some other departments, the decisions are made, you know, by a committee, and it doesn't necessarily have to, you know, be for the advisor. And other, depending again on how the department is structured, particularly in terms of funding, it could be that, you know, you have to be tied to a specific advisor when you're admitted. And you might not, and honestly, you might just not know this. And that's just kind of how it is. Some departments also have rules that, like, in order for a candidate to be admitted, there have to be X number of faculty who vouch for them, sort of saying, I would advise the student. And, you know, often it's more than one faculty member. Sometimes it's like 3. And that doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, all 3 of them are going to be advising this person. It's an issue of, like, you know, that there are multiple people around who could. And then the other thing is there might need to be something related to, like, do we have kind of enough money in the bank to fund the student through their PhD, which means a combination of teaching assistant lines and research assistant lines. And so is the person who's going to be their advisor, do they have enough research assistant lines and it's very complicated. And basically the answer to your question is it varies. But it tends to be more based on issues of, like, fit and capacity. So, and in part, this is also to help you. Like, you don't want to go into a PhD program where there's no one who's going to be an appropriate advisor for you. And this is a difficult decision to make too, right? Because sometimes, like, your dream advisor might be at capacity. Like, they have 10 PhD students and no grant money, and there's no way they can take another student, at least then. And so if you are admitted into that program, it might be with a different advisor, and you have to be okay with that. Very complicated decision space. Same thing with, like, you know, applying for jobs in terms of, like, the things that they have capacity for and what they need. Okay, let's wait. Where am I in these questions? Oh my goodness, you guys have so many good questions. Let's see. Okay. I'm currently getting a master's in philosophy with an okay GPA, but a bad undergrad GPA. Will the school screen my application? So again, I can't tell you how specific programs might do their screenings, etc. However, typically your GPA is only one part of an application, and an upward trajectory for a GPA is good. So at least in my experience, if you have a master's degree, your undergrad GPA is less important, particularly if your master's degree is in the field that you're applying for PhD programs, let's say that you started out undergrad as some major, which happens, like people change their majors all the time. And it's actually really common for a student's grades to go up once they find the right thing that they want to do. And that's, something that I hope admissions committees notice. How important is reaching out to professors you've mentioned in your essays, and how much does it matter if they reply back? So to me, the benefits of reaching out to prospective advisors ahead of time is more for you than more for your information when you're putting together applications. And the reason is because if a faculty member that you want to be your advisor is, again, at capacity, knows that they cannot accept new students to work with them this admission cycle, they will often tell you that or imply that. And will often then suggest other faculty in the department that you should reach out to. And sometimes they might be people you wouldn't have thought of because maybe it's a faculty member with a new research agenda or something like that. And they'll often point you to professors that they know do have capacity. And so that can be really helpful for you when you're putting together your application materials, because it'll tell you, maybe who you should mention in your essay. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't mention that original professor, but just that you'll want to make sure to be broader than that. So to me, that's the most useful thing. And so if you didn't do that before your application, I don't think it's necessarily important for you to reach out, afterwards. Again, it could be that this is a norm in other fields. But it seems like once you have your application in, they're going to be reading that. And then sometimes people will reach out to you to have a conversation, before formal interviews, etc. So I don't think there's anything wrong with reaching out after, but I think it's probably more helpful to do it before and less important that you do it after. And then in terms of whether they reply back or not, my answer with respect to any question about I emailed a faculty member and they didn't reply is don't read too much into that. We get a large number of emails, and it is very easy to lose something. I try so hard, and I have this problem as well. I would also say that it is always acceptable to follow up once, in a couple of weeks, if you haven't gotten a response from someone. Because it could be that the email just get lost. And if you don't hear back, then just call it a wash. But I also wouldn't read too much into it. Should you be concerned if your award letter only has 1 year of funding, even if the school confirmed that they expect to have 5 years but can't put it in the offer letter? This is a great question, and I know a little bit about this. So, for example, for our program, the offer letter is 4 years of funding. However, our students take about 5 years to graduate. That's typical. And it's not that we expect them to have to pay for their last year. It goes back to the funding and money in hand thing. So, in order to make an offer, we have to know that we can pay for them. And, 5 years is a long time. and we have to supplement research funding with teaching assistant lines, which come from the college and not our department. And so in order for the sort of college to sign off on these admissions letters, it had to be, as I understand, at least, I'm not the person doing the finances, but this is kind of my understanding, and it works this way in some other places as well. So the expectation is that you will have funding the whole time, but that it's some of it's probably going to come from research assistant lines from grants that don't exist yet because it's 5 years in the future, right? So if they tell you that they do anticipate having funding for the whole time and you believe that, I think that's probably fine. That I will say, like, 1 year is quite low. So my advice would be to either talk to current students in the program, or you might be able to ask them directly, sort of as a follow-up to this, like, so your current students, that's what's happening, right? Like you can find out, like, are their students actually being funded for the whole time or not? Because that'll give you I think the answer you need. What should students do the summer before their PhD to prepare? I've been thinking about doing a video about this a little bit later, once there's like the, everyone's settled and they know where they're going. So first of all, you don't have to do anything, not a thing. It is perfectly acceptable for you to spend your last summer of freedom being free. You're not supposed to come in as a PhD student knowing things. Sort of. You know what I mean, though. Like, so I think it is perfectly acceptable to do nothing. However, especially if you're excited about your research area and you want to, then start reading up on the things that you're interested in. Make sure, read recent things by your prospective advisor or other students in that department to find out what's going on in their lab. You could even ask what is a likely kind of thing that I might be working on? And hopefully they'll tell you, well, here's some things you could read, but to be clear, you don't have to. At least that's my hope. But if you're excited, then honestly, the best thing you can do is read up on what's happening in your field. And also, this is a great habit to get into as a PhD student. The very first video on my YouTube channel is advice for new PhD students. And one of the things it talks about is starting to read and get a citation manager and keep track of things. So, you could start that kind of thing if you wanted to. But again, I don't, there's not an expectation that you spend your summer. I keep comparing this to law school, and maybe that's because I think that getting a PhD is so much better than law school. But when I was about to start law school, everyone gave you the advice that you basically had to learn everything the summer before. There were this whole industry of these books that you would get on the classes you're going to take your first year. And the idea was that you had to learn everything the summer before, which is madness. It's total madness. And the PhD is more like that. Let's see. When is the appropriate time to reach out to an advisor? So for the next cycle. So if you're going to be applying for PhD programs next fall, probably, I tend to start hearing from people late summer, early fall. I don't think they're probably not sooner than August, but it depends on when the admissions deadlines are for your field. So sometimes in my field, a very common deadline is December 1st. If the deadlines are, say, October 1st instead, then you want to push it sooner. But I'd say maybe a couple of months, maybe 3 months before the deadline, but probably not earlier than that would be my suggestion. Let's see. So have heard that U.S. universities have observed a surge in applications this year, maybe due to GRE requirements being waived off. Might this make admissions more competitive? I don't know. I will say, if the reason is if this is true, and if the reason is because GRE requirements have been waived off, that makes me happy. I fought to have the GRE requirement removed in my department, and the reason is because I personally think GRE scores are useless. In the small data set of PhD students in our program, they basically have I guess I haven't actually mapped this out, but anecdotally, it feels to me like GRE scores have zero relationship to how well someone does in their PhD, at least in my field. This could be different in fields where let's say you're getting a PhD in math, then maybe having a low math GRE score would actually mean something. But in my field, it doesn't, as far as I can tell. And there's a lot of research that shows the barriers to GRE scores, whether it's financial or test prep or these. And so anyway, I just think standardized tests as cutoffs for PhDs especially is just kind of garbage, my personal opinion. So if more people are applying because they don't have to take the GRE, I think that's good, but that's not really what you were asking. I've also heard people say that maybe more people are applying to PhDs because, the current job market, et cetera. So I don't totally know if this is true, but one thing I will say, and so for our department, we did get more PhD admissions this year than last year, but we've gotten more applicants every year. My program is new. It's, my department was founded in 2015. And so our first year, we got 25 applicants or something because nobody knew we existed. And so we've gotten more every year. So I can't tell you based on our experience but it wasn't drastically more than last year. I will say though, that if people are applying to PhD programs because they don't know what else to do, and they don't have a good reason for getting a PhD, then my guess is that their application probably won't be really strong, because if you don't know why you're getting a PhD, it's really hard to sell yourself as being an appropriate candidate for a PhD. Beyond that, I can't, it's really hard to answer that question. Are students from engineering backgrounds preferred over, say, psychology and information, informatics, technology, and social? Oh, someone's applying to Northwestern. No. I know that seems like a sort of hesitant no. For me, it is a very enthusiastic no. If you were applying to our program to work with me, I don't want to say that one would be better than the other, but probably psychology would be better than if you had a mechanical engineering degree or something. I think it depends on the kind of research that you want to do. But, in general, and actually this goes back to a question that someone asked me on Reddit the other day, which was whether it looked bad to have a professional master's degree as opposed to a research master's degree. And my answer was that it depends on, basically no, because what your degree says, I think, doesn't matter as much as what you did, right? So if you get a degree in psychology, which also I have an undergrad degree in psychology. So if you get a degree in psychology, and let's say you have research experience, what kind of research experience was that? And so for me, as an undergrad, I worked in a human factors psychology lab where we were doing things with technology. And so that was, I would have, if I were a computer science student studying HCI, I might have actually had very similar research experience. And I also took computer science classes. And so as an applicant, I would have looked very similar as a psychology versus a computer science applicant. So I think that what you're doing probably matters more. And if you're applying to do qualitative social computing kind of work or something like that, then knowing how to code might not even matter, right? So I think, so the answer is basically there's not one major that's better than another, but it probably depends on the kind of experience and classes and research, et cetera, that you have compared to the kind of work that you want to do. Someone asking if you can apply for a PhD from Italy directly. So I'm not sure that I know the answer to this question. So in general, you should be able to, if you're an international applicant, you should be able to apply the same way that a domestic applicant could. I don't understand the rest of your question about the circular economy. I just think I don't know the answer to that. But if you're an international applicant, you should have the same kinds of opportunities and should go through the same kind of admissions process if you're a domestic applicant. People have asked me before if international applicants are at a disadvantage. Again, I don't know if that's the case in some places, but in my experience, no, it doesn't matter at all. The only disadvantage that I would say international applicants have had to our program, and this isn't even relevant this year, is that because of budget constraints, we don't fly international applicants out to our admissions day, just because it's so expensive. And so we tend to do virtual meetings and stuff with international applicants. And so that could, it could put them at a disadvantage in terms of them learning about the program. I don't think it puts them at a disadvantage in terms of being accepted into our program though. And of course this year, everything is virtual. I've just realized that my webcam seems to be focusing in and out. Sorry about that if I keep getting blurry. Let's see. How do you deal with schools delaying to reach out to you about your app outcome? Well, it's January, so I would say that there aren't any delays yet, I guess. It's still quite early. I will say, because someone was asking me about this, should you be concerned if you haven't gotten invited to an interview or admissions visit or something yet? And maybe, I don't know. Different programs are on different timelines. I will say that this year, it is possible that because programs are not having to fly people out to do interviews and stuff, they might be taking longer than usual just because there isn't that, because you need to buy plane tickets in a time that they're reasonably priced, which is one reason why these invitations tend to go out quite early. So it's possible that this year these things might happen later than usual just because there isn't that sense of urgency for having to buy plane tickets. But if you haven't heard yet, that doesn't necessarily mean you won't hear. Would preparing slideshows about your research help an interview? So again, I don't know what formal interviews look like in some fields. However, my instinct on this question is that if you haven't been asked to prepare a presentation, you probably do not need to prepare a presentation. So let's say that I had reached out to an applicant to just have a talk as a prospective advisor. If they came with a PowerPoint presentation, I might think that was a little odd. Not necessarily bad, but it would definitely be unexpected and a little bit odd. That said, again, I don't know what this looks like in different fields. And one thing you could do is ask, if you've been invited to an interview, you could email them and say, would it be appropriate for me to prepare a short presentation based on my research? And then hopefully they would just tell you the answer to that. Tips on convincing a school you're willing to move to another state. I don't think you should have a problem with this. It is completely normal for students to go, wherever to get a PhD. Sometimes if you if you are already in a place or if you have family there or something like that, it can be useful to mention that because basically it increases the odds you will go there. But I don't think that this has any bearing on admissions at all. So yeah, though I will say, if you have been admitted into a program, so you have been admitted and you're on an admissions visit or you're talking to a prospective advisor or something like that, if you know that that's where you want to go, tell them. if you've already been admitted, there's no reason not to go ahead and tell them that like that they're your first choice, and that is a kindness. You're making these decisions. There's calculations going on in the background about admitting students based on yield, right? So, unless I assume there are some PhD programs where they're so awesome that almost every single student that's accepted into the program comes. And if that's the case, then their calculations are very easy because they know how many people they can accept, and they accept that many people and they all come and it's awesome. But that's not the case most of the time. You make offers and not all of them come. Like, I would say that our yield tends to be, 50 to 60%. It's even been lower in the past. And so knowing whether a student it's not going to impact whether they're accepted or not, but it might impact like the number of students that are accepted. Anyway, it's kind to let them know as soon as possible your decision. That said, you don't have to, in the United States, I'm like 90% sure this is true for most PhD programs. I don't know if there are some that this is not true for, but you have to give a formal answer by like April 15th, and they're not allowed to ask you for a formal answer before then. How much? So I think I already answered this question about undergrad GPA for masters. Yes, your GPA in graduate school can certainly make up for an undergrad GPA, just because it's an upward trajectory, and I think that's a positive thing. So what if you graduated from your master's a long time ago? So this person is saying 2004 and has worked as a designer. Is there any chance to apply for PhD programs based on work experience, even if you're, older? Yes. So again, we have had students in our PhD program who are in their 40s. My advice would be to make sure you have a really good answer for like why you want to get a PhD now. Like, what is it about your experience for the past 15 years that has led you to wanting to do research? My assumption is that if you want to get a PhD now, it's probably because you want to do research. And so, what is it about the past 15 years that have led you to want to do research? And how has your experience, because it seems like, I'm guessing that you're probably applying into PhD programs in a field that is similar to what you've been doing. So like, what have you been doing also that's kind of do you want to do UX research or whatever? Just make sure that you like tie those things well together. And so, yes, I think it's absolutely possible. How to explain a lack of courses in a topic. And I lost my place. Lack of courses in a topic related to the target PhD program in the interview. Well, I think this is going to vary by what field you're in and what kinds of requisite experience you need to do the kind of work that you're going to do in a PhD. I don't tend to look at classes a whole lot, in part because, I don't know, I just tend to assume that like sometimes PhD students might be coming in as a little bit of a blank slate, or like research might be more important than classes, for example. I would say just like what kinds of classes have you taken that are relevant in terms of like the work that you might be doing? Like, how does the experience that you have in research, et cetera, relate to this field, and just make it clear like why you're going into this field. I think that's probably the most important thing. Let's see. Preparing for possible interview questions, especially if you have a language barrier. So I do think that preparing is a good idea. Having a sense of what kinds of questions might be asked. So I did a video about this, but it's quite general, right? So I think that if you can ask, like, find someone who's a current PhD student in the field that you're applying to. Like, if you're at a university now, like, ask someone in your department or something like that to find out what kinds of things might be asked for that particular field, because it might be different. But in general, make sure that you have good answers to things like, why do you want to get a PhD? Why do you want to come to this particular program? What kind of research experience do you have? Or what kind of, like, or how do you know that you want to do research? And what kind of research do you want to do would sort of be like the common questions. Okay, let's see. Already talked about GPAs for undergrad versus masters. How to ask if there's an option to master out. Oh, so if you've already been accepted into the program, then I think this is perfectly acceptable to ask. You might not want to ask this question before you've been accepted. So basically, I think your question is, can I potentially leave this PhD program with a master's degree? I do not recommend asking that question before you are admitted into a program, because honestly, even if this isn't the case for you, like, a student starting a PhD program because they want to get a funded master's degree, but no, they don't want a PhD, is a thing that happens. And that is, like, it's a big red flag. But if you've been admitted, I think it's a thing you can ask, or you can ask current students, because, like, the students who are senior in the program, might know the answer to this. Oh, and actually, though, a way to ask this question that would not be as much of a red flag would be, do PhD students get a master's along the way? So that's actually a common thing, is that, like, once you've done all your coursework and whatever a requirement would be to get a master's in that discipline, sometimes you just get a master's degree sort of along the way. So you could ask that, and that wouldn't be as much of a red flag. Let's see. So we have a student who's first year in comp sci and studying economics. I'm interested in tech ethics. What research? What resources are out there? Someone who wants to know about my research area. So first of all, I would recommend, if you're interested in getting into tech ethics, looking to see what coursework there is at your university. And this might be, and it might not be that there's an ethics class, right? But like, ask, like, faculty in the computer science department, like, what faculty around here are doing things that are related to social impacts of technology or ethics or privacy. Like, think about, like, writ broad, and, like, see if you can find out if there's any faculty doing research in that area, because then hooking up with them in terms of, like, being an undergrad researcher or something might actually be your best path. And then, of course, there are a ton of books on this topic. And if you're just wanting to learn, depending on your specific interests, right? Like, so for example, you might be, mention some of the things you mentioned here about your identity. You might be interested in Design Justice is a great book, or Race After Technology is another great book that I recommend. Automating Inequality, sort of depending on the kinds of things you're interested in. But the other thing is, like, if you might be interested in going to graduate school, start looking into, like, the scholarly work that's being published in that area. That's the kind of stuff you want to do. So, there are tons of people who are doing work on, like, ethics and queer communities and technology and these kinds of things, and just, like, going to Google Scholar and looking into this kind of stuff, I think would be a great place to start. Some PhD interviews need a project presentation. What you keep in mind? Oh my gosh. So as I said earlier, when someone asked about this, I've never seen this before. So I don't totally know what these are like, doing a presentation during a PhD interview. But But my tip on any presentation is, know your audience. So and make sure that you're not, using too much jargon. Because even if it's in your field, sometimes subfields can be things that not everyone would totally know what you're talking about. So, make sure that you know how much time you have and that it works for that amount of time. If you're using slides, make sure that they look nice. And if you have, simple can be better than complicated, particularly if you're not a great designer. And make sure that you've practiced it, and ideally practice it for another person. So I'm not sure if you were supposed to get an interview invitation by January and February. Does that mean I'm not shortlisted if I don't get an interview? So I don't know if you were here when I was addressing this earlier, but it's impossible to know, what the timelines for individual programs are, and they might be a little bit later than usual this year for various reasons. So often, if you don't get an interview, that does indeed mean you're not shortlisted. But it's impossible to say, and it's also impossible to know when those are happening. How can you tell a potential advisor that you're going to publish a paper soon, but is it worth mentioning? So if you've done so it's worth mentioning any research project that you've done, regardless of whether it's turned into a publication or not. But if you've done a research project and it's likely to turn into a publication, then talk about that and say how excited you are to write it. Oh my gosh, I've done this research project and it was so great because X, Y, and Z, and I am so excited about turning this into a publishable paper, would be a thing that I would love to hear. So Elaine, your question about potential advisors after getting multiple acceptances. So the video that I posted earlier this week is about this. So more detail than what I'll say here, but I would say research fit can be a huge thing, but also are they a good person who treats their students well? It's important, and it's going to be differently important to different people, but also some things around whether they care about whether they respect the things that are important to you. And people have different answers to this question, right? For some people, an advisor who is going to encourage healthy work-life balance is more important to them than some other people might be, right? Whereas some people, the connections of that advisor might be particularly important. So it's really going to be individual for you. And so think about the things that are important to you and what's going to make your life better while you're, for the next 5 years, and what kind of mentorship do you need? Because also advisors have different advising styles. Some are more hands-on, some are more hands-off, some are, scattered, and that drives some people crazy and others don't care. So it's going to be really individual for the kinds of strengths and weaknesses that you have and the kinds of things that you need. Chances of being admitted with a particular GPA, I have no idea. It's impossible to say, but I can tell you one thing, which is that PhD applicants are not admitted based on their GPA. It's many other things besides the GPA, but also everything is going to be completely different based on department, program, discipline, etc. Is it a mistake to apply to only one school? Well, I guess that depends on the outcome. However, so first of all, I applied to only one school the second time around for PhDs. However, there's a specific reason. I had to be in Atlanta because of family reasons. So it was either get a PhD in Atlanta, which meant Georgia Tech was the only option, or don't pursue a PhD yet. And that was what I was willing to do. If I had not gotten into Georgia Tech, I would have gotten a job as a lawyer in Atlanta, and I probably would have super hated it and applied to PhD programs a few years later. And that's just what would have happened. So that's the decision that you have to make, right? If there's only one school that you want to go to and you would rather not pursue a PhD yet, then go somewhere else other than that school, then you should absolutely only apply to one program. However, if that's not the case, then you should apply to more than one, because again, there are reasons you might not be accepted into a PhD program that have nothing to do with how good you are. It could be an issue of timing. But that's the decision to make. Would I rather not pursue a PhD yet, or like wait another year or whatever, or go somewhere else? So that's the decision to make in deciding where to apply. How do PhD students prepare for a postdoc? So I didn't do a postdoc, so I'm not sure I know the answer to this question. I'm not sure if you're asking like, how do I prepare myself to get a postdoc, or like I have a postdoc and how do I prepare for it? I think if you have a postdoc and how do you prepare for it is to like read stuff in the new area that you're going to be working in, make sure you know what the PI has been doing, what you're going to be doing, that means that sort of thing. And if you're wanting to apply to postdocs, then same way you prepare to get an academic job, which is like publish and do good work. So again, I probably after this stream is over, I might go ahead and film a video about like choosing PhD programs generally. But again, advisor is only one part of that, and you should consider the things that you care about in terms of like, is that the students in the program, whether it's a good community and you're going to have friends, is it if prestige matters to you, then like that's the thing to take into account as well. What about the weather? Lots of things that people are going to take into account differently. So you need to figure out what the most important things are to you, beyond advisor fit. How many days did you hear back from your I'll let other people, if other people want to say like when they've heard back, etc., feel free. But basically there's no answer to this question. Like timelines are going to be vastly different for different programs. Is it a bad sign if you send a question after an interview and haven't received a response? So same answer that I gave earlier to something about like not hearing back from faculty, is that I would not read too much into it, because faculty are notoriously lose emails. It's just very hard to keep track of them. And for anything with respect to like, I emailed a faculty member or something and I have not gotten a response, my advice is to wait a couple of weeks and reply to that email and follow up and say, I just wanted to follow up on this, and then if you don't hear back after that, then don't try again, but also I wouldn't read too much into it. Again, a question here about how long it takes for, it's going to vary greatly by departments in terms of what their timelines are. Cost of living, you're not, how do I know if this stipend is enough to for me to live? Obviously, I can't answer that question for you, but my best advice on this is to talk to current PhD students in the program, because they will absolutely know the answer to how the stipend and cost of living relate. So I'm seeing this a more specific question from Judy, but I think the sort of general question here is, what do you do if you don't get into PhD into PhD programs this cycle, and you can't, for example, or don't want to get a master's degree? This is a really hard question. It's going to be really individual. Like, is there a job in your field that you want to get? You can always apply for PhD programs later, right? So after I was rejected from every PhD program, the first time I applied, I worked as a technical writer for a while. just for a year, because then I went to law school, which is like, also don't do that unless you want to go to law school. Like, I was like, oh, I guess the PhD thing isn't cut out for me. I think I would really like to be a lawyer. So that's why I went to law school. But because I really did think I wanted to be a lawyer at the time. So only go to law school if you want to be a lawyer. But, you can get a job in your field and you can still apply for PhD programs later. And I really can't, I can't give you any more specific advice for that, except, any job that has kind of a taste of researchy type stuff in it is going to be better if that's your ultimate goal. Videos that describe weaknesses during a PhD interview, they tend to speak about being a perfectionist or inability to say no to others. What examples of weaknesses have mentioned? Oh, you're asking about if someone asks at an interview what your weaknesses are. Oh, okay. So I think I talked about this a little bit in my video about PhD interviews and like what advisors are looking for. And like my biggest piece of advice is if someone asks you what you see as your potential weaknesses as a PhD student, which by the way, I actually think is a stupid question, but people ask it. If someone asks you that question, do not say something like, I'm a workaholic. I don't have good work-life balance. I'm going to be in the lab night and like, just don't say that. Because I mean, even if it's true, it just comes off as trying to seem like you don't have weaknesses. I think that the best answer to that kind of question would be something that points to how you want to improve yourself. So for example, and like sometimes you're going to know what your weaknesses are, right? So let's say that you're not a good writer, and not everyone going into a PhD is a good writer. And they're going to know you're not a good writer because they've read your statement of purpose, right? So if you say, I haven't had a lot of writing experience yet, and so I've really been working on that, and so it's a weakness that I have, but I am so excited about getting more experience, about working with other people on papers. I noticed that you have a writing center at your university that's open for graduate students, and I'm so excited about jumping in and getting help with my writing. Like, it feels to me like that kind of thing is better than like trying to pretend you don't have weaknesses. That said, again, I imagine there are faculty out there who like are expecting to get the I'm a workaholic answer. It's just make sure that whatever you say, it feels genuine and not like you're trying to pretend like you don't have weaknesses. Let's see. So Keith asks about having independent research since they didn't go to a research-based college. So, I hope that faculty, admissions committees, et cetera, understand that not everyone has the same opportunities to do research. Like, totally valid. And but like I have PhD students right now who are my advisees who had very little research experience. But they were able to talk about how they knew what it was that they wanted to do. And, I took this class that had this thing that was kind of like research and I loved it and I really wanted to, so, show your passion for it. But also if you've done independent, like let's say you go to a school that doesn't have faculty that are doing research, which is totally valid. If you have then shown the initiative to do research on your own, even though you don't have any mentorship and you might not know what you're doing, I actually think that speaks volumes about you and your passion for research. So I actually think that could be great. And also, I feel like I have to say, some of this isn't fair. Like, there are certainly PhD programs that are going to like brush your application aside if you haven't already worked in a research lab and don't have any publications yet or whatever. And I personally think that is not fair, and it reinforces inequities that already exist in the system. So, you know, part of my advice here as well is like apply to different kinds of places, because not everywhere is like that. People mentioning in Grad Cafe that they've gotten invitations for places you've applied. Does that mean you're rejected? So maybe, but not necessarily. I mean, again, I will say something I said at the beginning of this, which is that constantly refreshing Grad Cafe is just going to make you feel worse about everything. I mean, I know I'm not going to keep you from doing it, but it's not going to help you at all. Like, there is no reason why knowing that other people have gotten interviews helps you, except to make you anxious. So it does not necessarily mean that you're rejected. Sometimes programs do invitations in waves, or sometimes like you're sort of on an unofficial wait list. So I wouldn't say that like lose all hope. But if you know, but I won't lie. It's of course not a good sign. But it's not a rejection until you receive a rejection. Financial advice on maximizing funding, spending, budgeting, type of housing. So, great question. I mean, I got to tell you, I wish I had been better with my finances when I was a graduate student. I'm also I'm in a worse position, I was in a worse position than most of you because I had student loans from law school when I was a PhD student. I lived with my parents for a couple of years at the beginning of my PhD to save money so that I could pay off some of those loans, the ones that were higher interest. So things like getting a roommate. It's very common for students to have roommates, et cetera. Asking current students about places to live, et cetera. But also budgeting. And I am such a bad person to be giving you advice on this because no, I'm a good person to be giving you advice on this because I did not do this. I did not budget properly when I was a PhD student, and I finished my PhD and came into my job and I had credit card debt. Like, not a lot, but like, but I shouldn't have had any. And I was sort of like, well, I'm not making enough money right now, so I'm going to have a real job and then I can, and everything's fine. But like, it's good if you can budget properly and not finish your PhD or finish your PhD in as good as a position that you can be in. But yeah, any more specific advice beyond that? I use You Need a Budget now, which I really like a lot for what it's worth if you want a specific recommendation. Can you ask a manager for a letter of reference? Yes. So the best letter of recommendations come from the people who can speak to your potential capacity as a researcher. That is the best letter of recommendation. But again, varies a little bit based on field. Like if you're going into a more humanities field, then maybe like research is not as big a thing as like someone being able to speak to your capacity for writing or something like that. So figure out whatever it is that is like the important thing in your field and get letters of recommendation that can speak to that thing. However, if you've been in the workforce for a while, et cetera, and it might not be appropriate for you to go back and ask faculty. It doesn't have to be faculty. And other things that people can speak to would be like your work ethic, your leadership skills, working on a team. Basically, just prompt them towards writing things that matter for a PhD program and not for a job, if that makes sense. What are the factors making difference on funded PhD acceptance? I'm not sure I understand that question. Are you just if you want to ask that in a different way, I'm not sure if you're just asking like, why might I get into a PhD program versus not? And lots of different answers to that. Sophia has a PhD interview on Tuesday and is afraid of over preparing and under preparing. Oh, well, first of all, congratulations on getting an interview and good luck. I mean, I would not spend the next couple of days like totally obsessing over it, right? Like, you can come off as over prepared, but I mean, I guess it's better to be over prepared than under prepared, but you don't want to psych yourself out, right? Don't spend the next 2 days rewatching old YouTube videos or whatever you might do to prepare. If maybe spend some time, like, asking yourself some questions, like, so Sophia, why do you want to get a PhD? And then like answering it. But you don't need to memorize things. And honestly, there isn't a lot that you need to do to prepare. I guess I'm thinking about like, what would I advise students who are coming to our admissions day, like what they should do to prepare? And maybe like, if you're meeting with specific faculty, make sure you find out who they are. Like, go to their website, see what kind of research I'm not talking about like go read all their recent publications, but like spend 10 minutes figuring out who they are and what they do. That would actually be a really useful thing to prepare. And it might not even come up depending on what kind of interview it is, but like, if you can ask a thoughtful question about someone's research, that's always something that comes off nice. Good questions to ask a recent graduate or a postdoc from faculty of interest are the same things you'd ask a current grad student. Good question. So probably the same kinds of things you would ask ask a recent grad the same things as a current graduate, except you could also ask them like what kind of job they have now and how they like what their job prospects felt like. That might be something good to ask. But yeah, other than that, think, like what is their advising style like and what did you think? That sort of thing. Probably quite similar. Timelines. I can't tell you all anything about timelines for when you might start to hear back, etc. I can just feel the anxiety in this chat, and I am very sympathetic, and I wish there was more that I could do to make you feel better. But at this point, it's just a little bit of it's just a waiting game, and timelines are going to be really different for different programs. How generic versus specific should you be when you're talking about your research interests in an interview? This might depend a little bit on who's interviewing you. So like if it's a prospective advisor, you might want to be a little more specific than if you're talking to someone who, isn't doing research in your area. In general, I guess, and again, this is one of those things that might vary slightly by field. So, or might vary slightly depending on like formal interviews. But like my advice, I guess, would be sort of similar to what I said in a statement of purpose, which is like, probably don't propose a dissertation. Like I'm going to do this study, and this study, but instead sort of talk about your area of interest. The other thing that you can do is if you have really specific ideas, you could, I think that's fine to talk about, but you might want to like phrase it as like, I'm interested in this area. For example, I really like this kind of research that this faculty member is doing, and I could see myself doing something like, for example, this more specific thing. Do computer science infotech advisors ask technical questions? So certainly not in my field. Again, I don't know what formal interviews look like in PhD processes, because I've never been involved in the program that had like formal interviews. And I also don't know if you're applying for a very technical computer science, like let's say that, you're applying to computer science PhD programs to work with someone on like very applied machine learning, and they might ask you technical questions in order to know if you have like how much they're going to have to teach you. I have never seen or heard of that kind of question in information science. or really like the computer science programs that I've been involved with. But again, I don't know. But I think my advice would be that if you get, like, I can't imagine a PhD interview being like a coding interview at a tech company. But now that you're asking me this question, I'm like, oh my gosh, is that actually true in some cases? And it wouldn't shock me. So I think that if you got a technical question that you couldn't answer, probably the best way to address that would be to sort of answer as much of it as you can, but then also say something about how you're really eager to learn about that thing, right? Like that would be my suggestion, I think, if that happened, would be to couch it in terms of like that you understand what the question is and you're really looking forward to learning more about that. How much did you know about the professors that you're meeting with? No, you're not expected to know everything about them. If a student was meeting with me and I am their likely advisor, like if it's a prospective advisor, I would expect them to have gone to my website and have seen the kinds of work that I'm doing recently. I would not have even necessarily expected them to have read a paper. However, I guess like reading one paper for a prospective advisor that interests you would be a good idea, or skimming a paper. But not more than that. Like, don't, I know that this is not what you're saying, but now I'm imagining someone like Googling me and coming into the meeting and being like, so I see that that you were born in this place, or something crazy. Like, don't do that. And if it's someone that is probably not a prospective advisor, like let's say you're meeting with 5 faculty and some of them are not in your research area, I would say like just all you have to know is like the general kind of research that they do. And this is not, and I know it's the same thing. Like in the time that I did this more recently, is when I was interviewing for jobs, and it was the same thing. Like the people that I was meeting when I went to a job interview, I like went to their website and saw what kind of research they did, but I didn't didn't overkill. Recommendations for a virtual visit. Engaging whether the program is specified. I mean, I have the same worry. My best advice is to talk to current students as much as you can. And ask them questions about what it's like to live there and what their interactions with the faculty are like and what the space is like. Like I actually just on Friday worked with some like comms people. Anyway, some people in my college are putting together a video that's showing off like the space for our department. Like someone's actually going to campus and videoing things. Like here's where the PhD students sit and that kind of thing. So you might be getting that kind of stuff. But talk to current students is the best advice I can give you, like as much of an opportunity as you have, including like following up with people via email or that kind of thing. And just like, it sucks. And I'm sorry that this is not a great time to be having to make these kinds of decisions. Do schools interview 2 times the number of students they want to? I have no idea. I really don't. I think this is probably really different by discipline too. I mean, when we do it in my department, when we do admissions and visits, it's a very short list. But also, again, that's not formal interviews. I don't really know what formal interviews are like. So yeah, I just don't know. What makes students accepted to programs different than others? So, I mean, there are lots of things, right? If you haven't seen it, I have a video on my channel here that's titled like why PhD students are rejected, which now that I say that out loud seems like such a negative way of framing it, but I think maybe some people have appreciated it. And it's everything from, it not being clear why you want a PhD to you're super amazing, but there's only one potential advisor for you and they don't have a capacity. And it's just really, it's really difficult to know, unfortunately. Is it okay to say you're interested in an industry job over an academic one when asked about goals? So that would not be a red flag for me. And I don't know if it is for some people, basically. You know, I hear from some people that there are some academics that are like concerned about their academic family tree or whatever, and they really want to turn out more students that look just like them. But I think that's probably the minority. I mean, if you're really worried about this, you could mention it, but not. It's really hard to say. I would not consider that a red flag. I can maybe see why some people might. And I wonder if one of the reasons why some people might is because it is the case that sometimes people who have industry goals realize they don't need a PhD to do those goals. So like, for example, when I was a PhD student, 2 of my lab mates left their PhD after a couple of years with a master's degree to get industry jobs because they realized the job that they wanted, they didn't need a PhD. So the thing that I would make clear is that like you want a kind of job that is a research job. Like, you know that you want a PhD, and that you're not going to like leave after a couple of years to go get an industry job. So maybe that would help. Advice or tips for a group interview. And as of right now, this is the last question. So, and actually it's been almost an hour and a half. So this might be a good one to end on. But if anyone has like any last real quick questions, throw them in here. Advice or tips for a group interview. So I don't know if group interview means you plus a bunch of faculty or one faculty plus a bunch of students. My guess is maybe the latter, because I've done that before. Like, one of the issues is we only have so many faculty. If you have a bunch of students at our admissions visit, then sometimes they ended up with like 2 students per faculty member or something like that, which is a little bit unfortunate. And hopefully it's not with your prospective advisor. Like sometimes you do that with like faculty that aren't probably going to be your advisor, in which case good questions to ask in a group interview are things that are sort of broadly applicable. Okay, yeah, a bunch of students. So it might depend on how the faculty member decides to handle it. And the way that they might handle it is asking you to ask questions. And it might be useful to ask questions that would be sort of broadly applicable to the students who are in there. Like, can you tell me about the culture of the department, or something that everyone would care about. I mean, these kind of things can be tricky, and it'll depend on sort of what the dynamics are between the students and how the faculty member is deciding to handle it. But I guess the only thing that I would caution you against is like, don't, try to monopolize, like, don't spend 10 minutes of a 20-minute group interview talking about your own research, right? It's just going to come off weird. So, just kind of read the room, but maybe have some kinds of general questions prepared. If an advisor has retired, so I don't think that a faculty's email address should matter at all, or the fact that they're retired should matter at all. So I would not be concerned with that at all, Henry. Okay. I think we're done. So I hope that this was useful. I don't know if there are any of you who have been here since the beginning and have listened to me this whole time. Hi, and basically just good luck to all of you. I hope this has been helpful. And I also, and again, I really hope that I've been able to give helpful advice, but, as always, some of my best advice is to talk to people in your department, in your field, et cetera, to make sure that you're getting like more specific advice when you can. And for those of you who are in the waiting game right now, do some self-care. I think that's my advice to you. And hopefully I'll have another video up in in a few days about making final decisions. I think that's the next day I'm going to film. Maybe not today, actually. But feel free to drop questions onto any of my videos, and I'll try to answer them if I can. And also thank you to people who've sent me nice notes about that this has been helpful, because it's really nice to know. So you're welcome. And thanks to all of you for hanging out with me, and the best of luck to all of you. Those of you in the chat, also, if anyone is watching this later, best of luck to you, and have a good rest of your weekend.